This video contains spoilers for Dark Souls 1 and 3, as well as Bloodborne. Unkindled discretion is advised. Dark Souls is a series writhing with symbolism. Symbols are the ember that infuses these games with a sense of mystery that has ensnared the minds of many a chosen undead to this very day. This process is also the saw FromSoft used to vivisect one of the most fascinating stories I've ever encountered. And if we're going to put those pieces back together, we first need to understand how they were taken apart. Symbolism is basically opening up a shortcut between a complex idea and an ordinary object. A tool that allows the storyteller to imprint meaning onto the brains of the audience. Typically, the connection is a fairly straightforward one. Helps with the efficacy of ministration, you see. But in Dark Souls, symbolism is, well, convoluted.
Perhaps you're familiar. No, how could you be? But one day, you will stand before its decrepit gate without really knowing why.
The narrative in the Souls series is never explicitly spelled out for us. Instead, the story of each world is a puzzle in and of itself, a tantalizing mystery that we must piece together from the scraps we are given.
Oh yes, I see. You sense a secret within the nightmare, and cannot bear to leave it be.
And if solving that mystery is our hunt, then symbolism becomes our hunter's tool, to read between the lines of the official narrative and make thematic connections that illuminate the truth hidden in the shadows, our eyes on the inside. So to first determine how FromSoft uses symbolism, let's just look at their own words. Take, for instance, this bit from the DesignWorks interview for Dark Souls 2. It's important that even bosses have some layers of depth to them. They are an enemy you fight first and foremost, but they should exhibit weakness as well as strength. Strength alone isn't interesting, but if you add a feature such as a hole or scar, then that weakness, that imperfection, really adds to the character. If at any point it feels like you're simply fighting a bunch of polygons, then it's no longer fun. If there's some conflict or contradiction behind a character, weakness behind its strength, or if they are inhibited in a believable way, then that comes across as you're fighting them and makes the battle more enjoyable. FromSoft wants its players to feel that the enemies you fight are more than just puppets, that they have their own hidden history, their own tragedies. And they hint at this mystery via symbolism, whether that's through visual design, movements, or even fighting style. One of the biggest challenges in pulling this off effectively is escaping the gravitational pull of the symbolic associations that the audience brings with them from the outside world. Hidetaka Miyazaki, the keeper of the Souls series, discusses this at length when asked about the design process for the Capra Demon from Dark Souls 1. It can certainly be difficult to achieve the right balance of symbolism in designs. It's true I dislike designs which are too obvious, but there are times when I feel design lacks a certain something. At times like this, I have been known to look through the reference materials, pick out things I like, and simply stick them on. The Capra Demon's head is an example of this. It gives a sense of ceremony and long-held tradition, which in turn hints at a developed culture. Details such as this can really improve the designs, giving them a significance not present in the initial image. Symbols contain an inherent meaning. They wouldn't be symbols if they didn't, but it's difficult to then add new meaning to that symbol. So I think this can be a really powerful weapon for the artists. What's important for us here is the idea of adding new meaning to a symbol. Dark Souls loves to utilize semantic overload in the symbols it uses for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it is to escape obvious stereotyping. Other times it's to break out of binary thinking.
What do you want? Tell me. Light, dark, or something else entirely?
But in every case, it's there to force you to think through the implications. One of the most beautiful things about this series is its use of symbolism in an inconsistent manner to prompt you to critically evaluate your assumptions about the world. Take bells, for instance. Bells are all over the place in these games, but their purpose, and therefore their symbolism, is constantly shifting. The first bell we run into is the first bell of awakening. There's never an explanation for why we're tasked with ringing the bells of awakening. All we know is that ringing them opens the gate to the next area, which makes them feel like a typical video game MacGuffin. but I've come to believe that the journey of the player through Lordran is essentially a ritual, a commemoration of the world's creation. I originally started looking into the writings of a religious historian named Mircea Eliade solely because Dark Souls 3 used the word profane, and I did a Google search. And yeah, I know that sounds really tenuous, but hear me out. Quoting from his book, The Sacred and the Profane, in a section about Vedic ritual, by the erection of a fire altar, Agni is made present, and communication with the world of gods is ensured. The space of the altar becomes a sacred space. Ringing the bells of awakening grants us access to Honor Londo, and hence communication with the world of the gods. And of course, the central game mechanic, the bonfire, is effectively a fire altar. One might raise the objection that bonfires and bells are two separate things, but later on in the series we're clued into a connection between the two. The bell tower is the grave of Firekeeper's past. When a Firekeeper has served her purpose, she is led to true darkness, where she enjoys a long-deserved sleep. Another clue to the symbolism behind these bells is the sudden appearance of Oswald the Pardoner. He is an NPC who only manifests once we ring the bell, an association the game forces on us by having us walk through an empty room on the way to the belfry, and having him only show up after the ritual is completed. He tells us that his purpose is to allow us to confess a sin or to accuse. This juxtaposition suggests a connection between the bell and sin, which happens to also be a connection that has some fascinating real-world parallels. As part of the Japanese New Year, temples ring their bells 108 times in reference to the 108 human sins in Buddhism. This ringing is an act that symbolizes a cleansing from all sins accumulated during the previous year, a pardoning. In a bit of cultural synchronicity, a very similar ritual is performed annually in England. On Christmas Eve, the All Saints' Church of Dewsbury rings its bell one time for every year since the birth of Christ. This is known as the Devil's Knell, and is meant to symbolize the death of the devil and, like its Japanese counterpart, the forgiveness of the sins of mankind. There are two interesting wrinkles to this story. The first is that the All Saints' Church is a parish church, a term that certainly has resonance within the world of Lordran. The second is that the Dewsbury Bell is said to have been donated to the church by a knight in an act of penance for a murder. This stands out to me because, going back to the sacred and the profane, for all these paleo-agricultural peoples, what is essential is periodically to evoke the primordial event that established the present condition of humanity. Their whole religious life is a commemoration, a remembering. The memory reactualized by the rites, hence by reiterating the primordial murder, plays a decisive role. What happened in Illo Tempore must never be forgotten. The true sin is forgetting. It's my firm belief that the Bells of Awakening are meant to symbolize a primordial murder, a sacrifice that brought both Lordran and humanity into existence. But then, that only leads us to a new mystery. Whose murder was it? Well, that's not really something I want to talk about just yet. Gotta save some of the flame for future videos. Another fascinating element of the use of bells in these games is how the shifting of symbolism hints at a parallel shift in perspective. In Bloodborne, players initiate multiplayer interaction through a pair of bells, but one of these bells beckons and the other one resonates. A single symbolic identifier that is both the transmitter and the receiver. Taking this idea back to the world of Dark Souls, your immediate task in the first game is to ring the Bells of Awakening, but Dark Souls 3 flips the script by having the game start with your character being awakened by the tolling of a bell. This is a subtle hint about your place in each world, and the differences between being the chosen undead and being unkindled ash.
And the unkindled will rise. Nameless, accursed undead, unfit even to be cinder. And so it is that ash seeketh embers.
But let's file that way in our subconscious and switch to the other big introductory symbol in Dark Souls, the idea of the prisoner.
Treat the Firekeeper not with discourtesy. She is much like thee. Prisoners both, kept to link the fire.
We can find references to prisoners all over this series. Dark Souls 1 begins with your Estus buddy breaking you out of your cell. Both 1 and 3 have you rescue prisoners in the first major NPC quests you are likely to encounter. The beginning of the High Wall of Lothric has not one but 2 instances of prisoner imagery prominently featured in the level design. Their inclusion is completely unexplained and never even mentioned, but both are blatant and unavoidable on your path through the zone. And the first of these bars is a visual callback to our original Firekeeper and her cell under Firelink's shrine. Here, it should be noted that when we get to carry her soul later in the game, its description asks, was the Ash Maiden locked in this dark prison for some transgression, or by her own will? Throughout the series, the prisoner motif is almost always left unexplained, with some of the most egregious examples being the chained prisoner of Ulasel, the lost sinner in Sinner's Rise, and the corpse with the rune workshop tool in Bloodborne. These are each likely mysteries unto themselves, but they also serve to prime our subconscious brain to look for prisoners where we might not expect. And once you're primed to look for prisoners, you'll start finding them all over the shop.
Oh, Lawrence, Master Willem, somebody help me. Unshackle me, please. Anybody. I've had enough of this dream. The night blocks all sight. Oh, somebody, please.